don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. I learned this the hard way with my first company, so I created NetSuite, the world's #1 cloud business system. NetSuite gives you the visibility and control you need to make smart decisions and grow with confidence. That's why companies who use NetSuite grow 3 times faster than the S&P 500.
Schedule your free product tour right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leader Show. We're live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, talking key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology, with a special focus on automation, AI, and digital transformation in hopes of making you a better digital leader. Today, we're discussing the changing search. Is it good? How AI is changing search for good, plus headlines for digital leaders. Thanks to our sponsor, Oracle NetSuite. Their unified cloud business management platform helps organizations automate core processes and provide real-time visibility into operational and financial performance. ERPA AI members and followers can receive special pricing and resources at erpaai.com/NetSuite. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up ERPA AI and the Digital Enterprise Institute. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking, advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga, a researcher, author, and coach. He currently serves as chair of our new Technology Innovation Board, and he was previously senior research fellow and professor at the Robert H. School of Business, University of Maryland, and held leadership roles at World 50 Labs, EY, and Accenture. Good afternoon, Carlos.
Hey, good afternoon. Great to be back again for another show with you.
My pleasure to have you and do this with you. And sorry for the late start. Had some technical glitches of my own, but hey, that's part of being a digital leader, right?
That's right, Dan. So you work through it and push through. That's what's impressive.
You work through it, yeah. We've had a lot of news, and it's funny is before we decided. Before we saw the news out of Google this week from their conference, we actually picked the topic for today's show, ended up being very appropriate. So we're going to talk about that in a bit, but lots in the headlines. I had a couple that I wanted to get your opinions on, Carlos. One of which was that a survey came out from our friends over at KPMG saying that 100% of U.S. financial reporting leaders say they have a plan to either pilot or implement AI in financial reporting in the next 3 years. 100%, not 90, 70, 60. I think it was 70% when they did it a couple of years ago.
Well, the problem is you can't be the one who says I don't, right? So,
will they actually do it? Is the better question.
Right? Next thing, like, why are you the one person who doesn't care about AI and accounting?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a call nobody wants to get over at KPMG, or at least the clients don't. But the point is well taken, right? Certainly, we talked with Anat Lechner last week about AI in creative industries. I would imagine this is a big issue with financial reporting, with auditing, right? As we know, anybody who has spent time in the audit world or audit firm knows that there's always this, I don't want to use like, what is it, like, a mutually agreed upon fiction, but there's something to that in any financial statement, as fraud after fraud says, right there. The auditor will always there's a whole bunch of disclaimers at the bottom, and this is only as good as what we were told. Yeah. Everybody understands that. It's still something that has to be done. So we'll see, right? What is AI? What will be the impact of AI on accounting and on auditing and on financial statements? I remember reading a couple of years back a paper that a professor, I think it was at Chicago, had written, where he and his team had looked at certain keywords in the risk sections of financial reporting, and they said, look, if you look at the key, and this is using sort of early stage language models, these are very good indicators of problems in these firms occurring publicly within the next 6 to 12 months. And this was a very early stage research project. I would imagine by now it's even stronger. So I think we'll see two things, right? One is the use of AI to improve auditing and to improve risk reporting and detection, but then also people analyzing perhaps these statements in ways 10Ks and everything else in ways that haven't been analyzed in the past and at scale. So yeah, it seems like an esoteric topic, but I don't think that it is. I think it could have significant implications for governance and management within a relatively short period of time.
Also in the news, AWS's CEO is stepping down, and it's been an interesting few years for AWS. They've had some deceleration in revenue growth, as the financial guys like to say. Right. Blamed it on rising interest rates and things, but net they had a couple rounds of layoffs over the last year. 27,000 employees being let go. And somebody told CNBC that the incoming CEO, this guy Matt Garman, is kind of a wartime CEO in the sense it may indicate that they're looking to shake some things up around AI. They lost some market share, I think, to Microsoft over the last year. So interesting there. We talked about them from the standpoint of AI recently.
I'm not familiar with this particular case. I do know that the CEO of Amazon, and Jesse was formerly CEO of AWS, right? So as you know, just generally speaking, it's hard to follow when you take over the job of the person who becomes CEO. There's always maybe a little, well, not always, but perhaps there's a little bit of extra pressure or scrutiny on that. If you become head of sales, because the former head of sales becomes CEO, then there's always, I know people who have done that,
right? And
they sense a little bit higher pressure because it's the job the CEO had in the past and was so good at it that became CEO for the job. So I wonder if there may be somewhere in the background there's a little bit of that's a tough, big shoes to fill, maybe at Amazon. But then maybe also, like we talked about before many times, right, the broader issue of AI transforming lots of different things. And maybe what we're seeing, this is an indication of shifts that are happening structurally within cloud that may be related to that, what's happening in the broader sense of with technology as a whole, right? But yeah, I don't know, but you may be following the story a little bit more closely than I am.
No, I just thought the timing was very interesting. We talked about some of the cloud providers, it was last week or a couple weeks back in our headlines about just the revenue growth they've seen on the coattails of AI and the need for computing power. So I thought the timing of this was interesting. Of course, they said it was for family reasons and all of that, but most people don't believe that. So that was just kind of interesting. The other thing before we get into some of the Google announcements from its annual I/O Developer Conference, which started yesterday. I think you and I have talked about this topic in the past. Driverless cars seem like they're on the regulatory hot seat right now. Speaking of Google, Alphabet, Waymo is the latest car company to get a pro federal investigation based on 22 incidents involving its robo taxis. GM has been in the news. Obviously, Tesla's been in the news. Whether they've kind of misled people about their autopilot function. So it seems like it might be a pivot point or a turning point for this space.
Well, this is what's going to be one of the great technical challenges of our time. And I have followed the Tesla case and the lawsuits and the deaths and people who were killed right on the side of the road and all kinds of things, crashes. Sometimes it seems to me, again, right, allegedly, I'll say that, right, either sometimes the tech, but also sometimes the driver, people who don't observe what it is that they're supposed to be doing because they're, for whatever reason. But it just, the complexity of the issue, right, is still a remarkable thing. And yeah, this is just one of those challenges that step forward, right, another step back. And unfortunately, at least if you look at the articles that I've read, people are dying, right, at in not in a significant number as kind of unintended casualties, right, or nobody volunteered me to be part of Tesla's AI experiment or self-driving experiment, but my car just got destroyed and somebody gets killed. I'm part of Tesla's innovation curve. And I think the comments by Mr. Musk were something like, well, this is just innovation is hard, right? Well, that's great. It's really hard if you're dead because
coming from the guy who wants to send people to Mars, right? So
right.
obviously it needs to be under
Wonderful.
a certain level of scrutiny.
You're not right. You didn't get hit on the side of the road by a runaway Tesla. So
Yeah.
I think again, we actually said this in one of our shows a while back where and I think I said something to the effect of there are going to be people who are going to get killed by autonomous vehicles who are just lab rats, right? They're part of this culture of, well, a few bodies piled up along the way. There's a small price to pay for us to have self-driving cars in 2035 or whatever the day is.
Well, I think, and we've talked about this maybe a year ago back, right? I think it's, some of these AI conversations are unfair in a vacuum, though, right? And certainly I'm not condoning the loss of life for the advancement of innovation, but I think to have the conversation in a vacuum is difficult. You have to compare it to the current state. We've talked about AI and customer service, right? So, is it a better or worse experience, dealing with an AI versus a human? It can't just be, is AI good or bad? It's got to be, is it a better experience?
Yeah, but I don't think it is in a vacuum. If you read the story that says Tesla's car got confused because it was foggy, or remember when it was sunny, it didn't like sunlight. So, right. And because
problematic in California, right?
Right, exactly. This Tesla didn't like sunlight, so it rammed into somebody who's changing a flat tire. Like, that's not in a vacuum. That is the car.
No, I just mean they'll compare. So what do you compare it to? So, you compare it to human error. If a human was driving that car, would the human have avoided that, right? There'd be the stats around car safety it's amazing people even get those stats. But to your point, right, maybe we say, hey, this is still safer than, grandma driving who probably needs to get her eyes checked again. And there was no need for her to get her license renewed at 75 years old. But GM has this lawsuit where the GM Cruise not only, knocked over a pedestrian, but dragged them 20 feet, right? I don't think a human would have, hopefully a human wouldn't have done that. A human would have noticed, like I did the other day when I ran over like some kid's bike ramp. Like, that doesn't sound right. There's something going on. I need to stop my car immediately and see what's underneath my car, right?
Oh, you're right. That's fair enough. And touche, right? That if that's what you mean by context, you're right. Maybe it's possible that even with the Teslas that don't like sunlight, at the end of the day, a Tesla on its own is way safer than the quote unquote average.
I don't know. Yeah.
Right? I don't know. I don't know what that story. It doesn't seem that way, but I could be wrong, right? This is like people up in the news, Boeing, who's also in the news these days, right? Okay. Safety concerns, whatever, but it's still like way safer to fly, even with quote unquote Boeing's issues. Yes, without a doubt. Right. But the problem is that when something goes wrong in a spectacular way. Maybe we're seeing that a little bit in these stories about Tesla, that no one reports the fact that somebody just crashed because it just crashed, right? But if a Tesla crashes, then there's a lot of noise about that. So it could be that's the case, right?
Well, and what's scary, the most scary part of the Boeing, since you brought it up, the Boeing, news, at least the news I've seen, is the cover-up factor, the push by leadership, allegedly, pushed by leadership to short circuit, if I can use that word, some of the safety testing, and to push things that maybe weren't safe, and then to hide the fact that, because you go on an airplane, assuming a certain level of risk, just like you go in a car assuming a certain level of risk, and that Tesla lawsuit, at least the one that I referenced before, is not even about the safety of the car necessarily. It's about whether or not they misled drivers and investors into thinking that the autopilot was fully, self-driving. So it gets back to, and I think we talked maybe 8 or 9 months back when we talked about this last, about the cameras that are on the Tesla recording as you walk by, right? So did you opt into that as a pedestrian walking past the car, right? So I think it's about and we've talked about this a million times on this show, about the transparency behind some of these things. And then you make your own, assessments of risk as a person, right?
You're right. And it can, as technology progresses, right, we see the intrusiveness again, right, progress with it. And in many cases, the pushback against it. And so, it's just the nature of the world in which we're in today, that we're constantly being monitored, surveyed, right? Ring cameras, that are sort of ubiquitous in many places, that becomes the, one other thing you can sort of point to. But yeah, we're in this world of being seen and monitored, and as we always talk about this, right, in levels that are way more than we even imagine on a daily basis.
So Google kicked off its annual I/O Developer Conference, and maybe I should have known this, but I didn't know that search was going to be such a big part of it. So I want to get into that. Obviously, it's our main topic here, but a couple other announcements that came out of that so far. I think it's still going on, but there's this Gemini Nano, which is Google's on-device large language model for devices, mobile devices. They're infusing AI into its workplace suite of Office tools, so that's going to rival, Microsoft with OpenAI's ChatGPT tools that are built into Microsoft Office suite. We're going to talk about a search, but they announced some pretty big evolutions in the world of search, privacy, and some of those things, and kind of what they're kind of calling AI organized search, which allows for kind of more tightly presented and readable search results, as the ability to get responses from longer queries and searches with photos and things like that. And that's launching this week. So a lot of interesting updates from Google, which a little bit behind the 8 ball in this area, right?
Well, and before we get into this, right, there's also the interesting story of Google in the news because of Project Nimbus this week.
Did I lose you?
Now, I assume you can hear me now, Dan?
Lost Carlos.
Can't hear me, Dan?
Sorry, everybody. Lost my internet connection. Don't know what happened there.
No worries.
Carlos, I was on a rant, so that's the problem.
You overloaded. You broke the internet.
I broke the internet.
It's your anti-Google rant. Hey, listen, what I was mentioning was the issue of Project Nimbus, right, in the headlines, because it's not a search issue, but it is Google. And I was, before, in researching for this week's show, I happened to come across an article from Insight Partners about search, but also I came across the statement that the CEO made a while back, saying, hey, we're about to enter this new age of AI. The one thing we don't want is people using the company as this is a business. So keep your personal stuff kind of out of Google and your protests. And of course, some people were not happy with that. And we go back to this thing we've talked about in the past of social issues, right? And social pressures crossing into corporate spaces. And that continues to be yet another thing, right, that defines it. And as we go through this, and I would imagine, right, this in today's talk, but at some point it's worth a conversation about how as AI continues to develop, I think it's also going to bring new societal, right, cultural pressures, issues that are not there. And it's pretty tough for the CEO of Google to say, hey, keep that stuff outside. We're making this stuff, but we don't really want to talk about what happens to it, right? Yeah. Or how it's used. And that seems to be the position, which is where there's sort of neutral creative technology, which is a myth. There's no such thing. And so what gets done with this tech, right, I think is another thing, right? But a topic for a future show. I know we're focused on search today. In doing some reading ahead of the show, I came across, like I said, this article from Insight Partners about future search. And the thing that I take away from all the reading was it is a pretty significant change. And again, the surprise of, we think search is sort of search, but this movement towards contextual search to search which is really aggregated and sort of presented to you in a format that takes the links and the sources down one level. I find that very interesting because we're now have a search engine that's actually writing a little essay, a little report to you, and not just giving you a whole bunch of links. That means the people who have the links are again one level below, right, Dan? And so the article was about, is SEO going to die, or how is it changing? Because that's the model that's driven Google to where it is today. If all of a sudden now what the system is doing is really is composing, right, versus presenting, because I think that's the difference. I look at the screenshots of the new, what does Google call it? SG, Search Generative Experience, right? SG is the new thing in the preview, because I have the preview. What you're seeing is a composition of information, not a listing of information. And I find that really interesting. Instead of a bunch of links, if you put it in project management, for example, you don't just see links to project management. What you see is an article about project management, right? An explanation of what it is, and bullet points, almost like I said, like a little report in half a page, which seems like a minor change, but
it's huge.
It's huge, right? It's a huge.
Well, and I thought you'd appreciate the little double entendre in our title for this week. How it's changing search for good, right? Question mark though, right? Because and it's not just I'll try to avoid the societal conversation, keep this more of a technical conversation or a bit really business conversation. But it's huge also from just the user standpoint and the business standpoint. I mean, Google, depending on how you add it up, Google search, YouTube, AdWords, that entire suite is responsible for about 175 billion with a B dollars in revenue, right? So anything that's going to change that is tough. And, a lot of people, like I said before, have been kind of critical that Google has been, a little slow to the large language model thing. And they had the kind of an epic failure with the last iteration of Gemini. Maybe there's a bigger reason, right? This is a potential business model shift, for them. I think that's part of, there was an article, what sparked this topic for me, even before I realized this conference was going to, announce this week, was that they were talking about charging users for AI-based search, which would be the biggest shakeup of the search business in 20 plus years, right?
Yeah, and the other interesting thing is it's not just Google, right? Because the number you give is just Google, but what about the entire ecosystem? As you and I know, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who make a living optimizing SEO, teaching you how to use, how to get your product in the right place. Advertising firms that are buying space, that are buying all kinds of different things. That as the model changes, right? And I think that's the new head of search at Google, right? That will ripple through the whole ecosystem. And now suddenly we're looking at a completely different business architecture, right? Which expands from what Google does. Every time Google changes search, there are winners and losers, as the Insight Partners know. This is going to be even bigger. So what happens now, right? How does this team go get? How do the entire? It's every website has some connection to this issue, right? And so now, all of a sudden, you need to be found. How are you going to be found if you don't make it into this little essay that somebody writes, or the machine writes about whatever the topic happens to be? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because you have. Right. You have this kind of, not only cottage industries, but every business from a mom and pop local mom and pop store up to large enterprises that have really, and kind of this cottage industry of, agencies that focus on Google ads and like you say, others like it. That's all based on, this model. So if this model changes, it's got huge ramifications, but one of the questions is, can it change? Right. So there's this company, which is one of the many, companies that, are supposedly the reason why Google's thinking about this, because, not only are they a little bit behind with, things like OpenAI, and they realize that that's gonna change things, but there's some direct competitors
Yeah.
to Google search emerging. There's a company called Perplexity, which is one of the fastest growing AI startups. They're valued at like 500 million. They've got 100 million monthly users. But even they, when they originally launched, announced that they were going to make ad-free searches, and they've kind of brought that back. They're now having building in advertising. So their original mission statement, and this gets back to, I think, a show we had a while ago, which was more about the credibility of information on the internet with the changing search, right? Their mission statement was initially that search should be free from the influence of advertising driven models, and now even they are going to an ad-based model.
Well, and there is a big sort of cognitive shift too when you look at Google's concept of SGE, right? And that is I've always said I don't like the term artificial intelligence. I think it's augmented intelligence, just the way Google augmented memory, right? Google is just like a big extra memory bank for us, right? So if you're going to look up who was the 12th president, you don't have to memorize it. You can just ask Google who was the 12th president. So it's not very smart, but it does have a lot of memory of things. The move to SGE is more in the direction of augmented, right? Because you have this sort of aggregator, right? This interlocutor between you and those links. That may seem like an inaccuracy, but it's a huge deal, because what Google is saying is, don't worry about the source at first pass. And there's this concept, right? Zero-click search, which means that you search something and you just go with whatever appears on the first page. This is even more so in that direction, right? Because the idea is that if you click on project management and in half a page, you've got everything you need to know about project management, what it is. If you're looking for simple definition, you're not going to click on anything anymore. So whatever it is that is being presented to you becomes the definitive statement. I think it's more like Wikipedia in a sense, funny enough, right? Structurally, where Wikipedia, that article is the summation. The links are still there, right? There's still hyperlinks. But Wikipedia, if you search Battle of Hastings, it doesn't give you a whole bunch of links, right? There is an article about the Battle of Hastings. And so, funny enough, Google is starting to look structurally more like in those previews, like a Wikipedia article, right, on whatever it is that you're searching, right? The other thing that's interesting too, they announced is visual search, which is getting upgraded. Yep. So you show a broken whatever ASCO washing machine and tell it, how do I fix it? And it knows, I'm looking at a picture of an ASCO washing machine and something's not working right. I find that also to be really interesting, and also probably way more dangerous, because now you're dealing with, to your point, right? I take a picture of you in the street and I ask, who's that person? Right.
Well, I think about, there was some regulation, I think it was a couple of years ago, where people, it seemed pretty impactful at the time, but this is on another scale. Around affiliate marketing, right? Mm-hmm. Where people were creating content that looked like real content, editorial content, but it was really more advertorial content. And so, all of a sudden now you see these disclaimers that say, this writer may receive an affiliate commission for, links back to this article. But, imagine that model where you're not confronted with a list of links to figure out on your own which one is credible. Oh, I want to click on the Wall Street Journal instead of johndoe.com, or some of these people, who are buying up domains and are not credible media companies or whatever. Now, as we talked about with, there was the author of the history, it was History Disrupted. What was the name of the book?
Yeah, History Disrupted, Jason Steinhauer. Right?
Jason Steinhauer, right? Like what, how do you validate the integrity of the content if you don't know if that content is advertised? At least right now, there's something on the top of the Google search that says sponsored, right? But if it's a summary coming to you from a chatbot that may or may not have that footnote or credit on it, where's it coming from, and did they pay to get that in front of you? Because that, to me, is the only way, Google and its competitors can make this jump. I mean, there's talk about them charging for AI, but I don't see the average consumer pulling out their wallet and paying for an AI search. That's it's possible, but it's a pretty big paradigm shift.
It's a big shift. And again, you can imagine like when you pull on these magazines and it says sponsored article, right? And it looks just like,
Yeah.
like I think Forbes does this all the time, where it looks like a regular article, and you start reading and realize, no, this is being paid by the Saudi Tourist Board or whatever. And so the same thing might happen here, where it becomes, what you're going to have is, let's say you wanted to buy an answer, right? Yeah. You go, okay, when somebody puts in project management, okay, Monday decided that it wants to own the project management answer. It sounds kooky, but it's not that kooky, right? Where I want to sponsor the answer to a question, right? And the more popular the question, the more it's worth to be included in that article, right? It's like, it isn't even like keyword. It's just that, what are people asking questions about? And I want to be part of that answer.
Well, and the internet is based on, even with the current Google search model for the last 20 plus years, at least, right, is based on links. Think about SEO, even what you're talking about, even sponsored links. It's based on links. It's about you being presented with a bunch of links, some advertising around those links, and someone getting paid or paying for you clicking on that link. In this model, in theory, there's no links. So if you're the publisher, this gets back to, we talked about journalism, right? This gets back to the news companies, the media companies, or anybody else that wants to be the recipient of a link, someone who's invested huge amounts of money into publishing content to get traffic back to their site. Now you don't need to go to their site.
Right. And digging even deeper, right? The original model of Google was, the more people who link to your site, the more authoritative you became. Right?
Yeah.
You're writing on whatever. The fact that other people were pointing traffic towards you gave you credibility within the algorithm. Now, is that still the paradigm? If not, what is? And again, I think that this removal, even one, not that a link is the source, although sometimes it is, but to the user, you're taking even one step back. And I find two things interesting just on this topic. One is, I noticed that Siri always gives, I always say, Siri always footnotes, right? So Siri says, according to Wikipedia, according to whatever, right? Siri is funny because Siri cites its sources. At least these days, when you ask it a question, I find that interesting. And then I do think this is a big change. There's somebody who I was listening to who was asking a search question on their iPhone, and you think they're asking Google, but they weren't. They were asking ChatGPT.
It's funny you mentioned Siri, because there's this thread online about Google reportedly in negotiations to build its Gemini AI into iPhones, which would be a blockbuster deal, right? Especially where there's been some disconnect, right? I mean, Google Maps used to be on iPhones, and they pulled that deal a couple of years ago.
Together, yeah, right.
Yeah, so, but that's impactful because, at the end of the day, I think who wins, and, Carlos, you and I said this, I think like over a year ago, but which was that whoever owns the assistant, the thing that sits on your phone or, gives you access, it wins at this. Bill Gates also said it, so he gets all the credit. But we said that, Carlos. You and I said that a while back, because at the end of the day, nobody wants to. I mean, my wife even the other day said, "Okay, I think I know what ChatGPT is now, but how do I get to it?" Right? She's not a technical person. She's not a business person, right? She's an average consumer who doesn't stay up on this stuff, and it's not intuitive or even obvious to the average human being, like it is to us, maybe where to access this thing. But when it's the button on your phone by default, then this thing changes very quickly, right?
And puts itself in between you and whatever else that you're looking for, right? Which is what Google did in a very basic way. When you think about it, Google is remarkable because it's such a structurally basic thing, right? I know it's incredibly complex algorithmically, mathematically behind the scenes, but as a machine to person interface, it's always been the little box, right? And it sort of stayed the little box. And so now that little box, and we talked about this 2 years ago, right? What would get rid of the little box? Well, the answer is a conversation.
Yeah,
a machine that talks to you like a person. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody the other day, and who's a CTO, and she happened to she noticed that I was doing this PhD program, and she said, "What's your PhD in?" And I said, "It's in language and rhetoric." She said, "That's a tech PhD from now on."
Wow.
And I hadn't thought about that. And I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "That's it. Because I see it every day. It's language, right? You're getting a doctorate in language that you're getting actually what will be in a couple of years, right? A tech PhD, which is language and rhetoric, and so I think that's really interesting to move. We talk about this distinction between technology and the humanities, right? And this question of what's an English degree for? Well, funny enough, right? It isn't that the English majors had to go to the machines. The machines are coming little by little, right, to the people who study language. And I find that really interesting because these interfaces are that. And I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I was on Photoshop, which I use, right? I use Adobe stuff all the time for film and editing. And I got this question, do you want to turn on AI in Adobe Photoshop?
Yeah.
Right. And suddenly just type what you want, make the house yellow, and it makes the house yellow. Forget the weeks of tutorials and learning how to remove a background or shift something, right? Or learn how to grab or lasso tool. It's all gone. You just tell it, and it's wonderful, right?
Yeah, that's always the thing with technology, right? I don't want to know what's in the iPhone. I just want to know that it makes phone calls and plays music, right? That was the beauty of Apple marketing for the longest time. And I'm just very interested to see who wins. I think anybody who puts this device, on everybody's, puts this thing on, easy to access. It, you don't have to know, oh, this is the one for graphics, this is the one for language, this is the one for this. It's just one button. It's sitting on your device. And I think, I saw some articles that keep saying Apple's the dark horse here. They've been even further behind, Google and Microsoft on this. They've been kind of quiet. Maybe this Google negotiation is part of the reason, but they have the data. They have the access. I don't know what the market share of iPhone is. I know it's not what it was a couple of years ago, but it's still significant. I think, they could emerge. I still think Amazon, could emerge. I mean, they've been doing voice longer than anybody else, I think. It never actuated into this real personal assistant that we all wanted it to, at least I wanted it to become, other than turning lights on and playing music. But maybe the capabilities are there. But then I also wonder, can a big company like an Amazon, like a Google, who would be forced to really cannibalize their traditional revenue streams, can these guys ever really, be the one? Is it really the disruptors that always win? Because when Google took on search, they were the disruptor, right? They weren't the big guy. Now all of a sudden they're the big guy, and you see something like OpenAI come along and disrupt, right?
I think you can, and if automotive industry is a good example, right? Tesla kind of has had it its way for a long time, but I think that you're now starting to see the big companies come online with phenomenal product that's as good, if not better. And I think that's a case study of incumbents, century-old incumbents that are responding, I think, relatively well to this massive disruption. Again, kudos to Musk and to Tesla for making the case that this is real, that it could be, that this was the future, but it's not their game anymore, right? And you know what it is too? We just saw this week about the electric vehicle tariffs. Once you start putting up tariffs, what does that really say? It said that you need artificial support, right? That's life support. Because if it was pure competition, then you'd be in trouble. So what do? You restrict imports, you put tariffs on imports. That again, back to capitalism, quote unquote, with a big C or little c, right?
Yeah.
Capitalism is great. CEOs at Ford and GM are wonderful. They're all capitalists until the global capitalism says, I can deliver an electric vehicle for 2/3 of what you can. Oh, in that case, let's run to the White House and let's go get some tariffs put on Chinese vehicles. Right? If American consumers want to buy Chinese cars, why can't they?
Yeah.
If this is really a capitalist economy, right, quote unquote, and these are people who run these companies that are really capitalists, then why are they stopping BYD and Geely and those other companies for importing product that's really good, that costs a lot less, and they have to compete on fair terms? Right? Yeah. So I think that aside, that was my rant for the day. But back to the issue at hand, what I find really interesting is what you were saying, which is this ancient interface mechanism, right, of just talking to somebody. I want to understand the question, right? Let's find the answer to a question, back to Platonic dialogues, which were search for answers in many cases. And you say, this is the fundamental human way in which we want to interact with everything. So the more the tech moves towards the very, very ancient paradigm of a conversation, right? Like you said, that's the winner.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
Yeah,
I would say think of this, and we're getting closer to it, right? We're getting closer to this idea of a universal assistant, right? Where I don't have to have, Alexa on my phone. I didn't disable my Alexa, so it's going to go off. But I don't need to have Alexa in my house and Google on my phone or Siri on my phone and Chat GPT on my browser, right? You're going to get to this point, and some of these other announcements, which we talked about the business model a lot here in search, but there's some really, really interesting announcements with some of this Google Gemini stuff this week. It's really multimodal. It's really having it with you all the time. It's getting to the point where it's like Star Trek, where you have a communicator or a computer with you at all times, or Her. If you love the movie Her, you have this thing, constantly with you. But it's getting there.
And I think the closest to that is Apple Watch, right? If you have the watch, you don't really need to carry a phone, not really, just for the camera, right? But I can maybe when the next Vert by 10, they could say, okay, what am I looking at? And it's, oh, that's an oak tree, right? Or hey,
Yep.
Where do I need to go now? And like you said, it's the race is on. I was in a Volvo XC40 recently, and it has the Google interface. So there's no more putting in an address. That's archaic now. You just say, Google, take me home, and it pops up your house and it shows you how to get home. It's not driving you there yet, but it will soon, I would imagine, or at least helping you get there. And so yeah, it's that idea of I don't want the best machine becomes invisible, right, Dan? Right,
Yeah.
Or at least unnoticed. It's just a thing that's part of your world and part of your day.
So one of the applications that they demoed at the conference was, exactly what you're getting at, where I think right now they're calling it Google Lens. But this thing will answer questions about whatever you point the camera at. Right. So, they showed a demo of a woman trying to get a broken turntable. Remember turntables? Anybody know what a turntable is on this thing? A record player, an old record player. And the Google identified that the record player's arm needed adjusting. And it automatically presented her with, a few options for video as well as text-based instructions on how to do it. It identified the make and model of the turntable. So I guess if they did have to order a part, so you know what part. I mean, think about the ramifications for tech support, field work, right?
MRO services.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other big thing that jumped out to me was this idea of kind of multi-step, you'll appreciate this as a researcher, multi-step reasoning. So you can kind of find several layers of information on a topic that you're searching for with contextual depth. It reminds me to show my dorkiness, where you see these Star Trek characters talking to the computer and reasoning back and forth with the computer and said, right. Hey, now change the language to this or change the environment to that. And, working with a computer to solve complex problems. And so there's some examples that they showed of, people trying to, ultimately, plan a trip. If you think about all the layers involved in planning a trip or a vacation, and how many different searches simultaneously you have to do. So yeah, to your point though, if we can just get the outcome with picking up our phone, that's who wins. If you can deliver that.
And you see the beginnings of that, right? If you go on ChatGPT, you say, for example, who was William Wordsworth, and it'll tell you this was a romantic poet, etc. What are some of his? You can ask, what are some of his most famous poems, and it'll give you Intimations and Immortality or whatever it happens to be. And what else did he write? And you can begin to see this conversation, right, with this technology as you explore, in this case, this particular writer or poet and what was the writer about. So you see the beginnings of that, and you can imagine this is moving so quickly. Maybe within 10 years, you do have that, right? You don't have it kills the apps, in my opinion, right? Because I think we saw a preview in the T-Mobile project they did with Brain AI, early, I think it was early this year, where there are no apps on the phone. The phone OS reconfigures itself depending on the task. So the phone morphs, right? It becomes the travel thing when you want to book a flight. It becomes the weather when you want the weather. So I like that idea, because I think even apps are, the time for that has sort of come and gone. It's time for the device to understand what it is that I'm asking for at that moment. And why should I have to be swiping across 40 different apps to get to the one I'm looking for? If I need to pull up an insurance card, right, for my car, then it just say, show me the insurance card. It should know it's on my Farmers app, and this is how you go in there and get it, and just give me the card. So that layer of interactivity, human-like interactivity, seems a lot closer now than it did even just 5 years ago, right? Dan? And
I think what you're talking about is access, right? But also the next iteration and kind of the promise behind, at least as I saw it early on, the promise behind the idea of digital twins was to be able to predict what you want, right? The case study that I saw, I think it was Toronto International Airport, where you walk in to the airport and it knows what airline you are, it knows your ticket status, it pulls up your ticket, your baggage information, it tells you what gate you need to go to, it tells you that there's a Starbucks on the way, orders your favorite cup of coffee so you can pick it up on the way there, right? I mean, there's, to me, and if I'm wrong and it's more complicated, somebody can let me know. But to me, all the pieces are there. I think it's more of a business model question of how do I monetize that?
But also,
if you don't have to create, if you don't have to manually do that, back to the search, if you don't have to manually do that search on your own, then how do I monetize that?
But also security, right? Because once you have that system in place, anything goes wrong, you're not going anywhere today, right? So, and as we see in China, you can be controlled, and so. Right, we know with that system, the social credit system, where you get points for this, point for that. You don't have enough points, you can take the local bus. You don't get on the express bus, right? And so there's this, you can't use public transport. And so once you have this system in place, then we go back to the authoritarian kind of nightmare of, well, okay, great. Now the whoever controls the system, right, is controlling whether you can even walk into the airport. And as you see in a lot of science fiction work, you could be shut down remotely.
Well, and the regulators are probably chomping at the bit here, right? Because with all the regulatory progress, in theory, if I can use that word, in the last 6, 9, 12 months, can you imagine the potential for monopolization, where all of a sudden, Starbucks is in that workflow, but the local coffee shop, the mom and pop coffee shop, is not, right? So, it does have ramifications for, small business that might not have the same pocketbook and access that, I guess in theory, if you're a local business and you're really good at SEO, you can beat out the AdWords. I think in theory, I think some people would say, but you can't, right? And that model, Google does a deal with whoever, and that's it.
And one more thought, right, before we run out of time, and that is which I don't see discussed in these articles about the future of search, is this: if you type in Battle of Hastings, what does Google know about you? Because just that one thing, Battle of Hastings, right? Well, you're an English speaker, let's just say you care about history, maybe Anglophone, whatever. And so if you have to type a whole sentence or a couple, what it gleans about you goes up exponentially. Because then you have syntax, vocabulary, right? All kinds of other things. And so the other thing that isn't being discussed is the more you talk to anything, the more it learns about you.
Yeah.
Right. If you and I communicate through Morse code, right, what I'm going to learn about you, right? And help, stop, right? Cities, boat sinking, whatever, stop. And so that's one thing, or Telegram. But as in an interface, in a natural language interface, within a few minutes, that thing is gleaning huge amounts of information about how you think, how you talk, education, background, class, race, all kinds of other things, right? What it will learn about you is on a whole nother level. And I know the people who are making this stuff know this, right? And and that hasn't entered the mainstream yet. That every time you ask GPT a question, you're informing it. I wrote the article a while back when I left consulting about the 10 laws of consulting. Like one of the 10 was the answer. The question is the answer. And AI, the question is the answer, right? You are answering a whole bunch of questions every time you ask it anything. I can tell you that, right? And if they don't have it yet, they will soon.
Yeah, I read something this week about marketing strategy and content strategy, and the author said something to the effect of, the clickbait or the lead magnet is about describing the problem, but the service is in solving that problem, right? But if that paradigm shifts upside down, then all of a sudden, all the people that provide that information are no longer necessary, right?
Right. And again, right, the ability to glean now or to extract isn't word based, right? It's sentence or even paragraph based, and that's a different thing than quote unquote keyword. This becomes almost ideas, right? You're communicating not just phrases, right, or terms to the system. You're communicating, I think, patterns of thought, syntactical patterns, a whole bunch more stuff that we don't think of.
Sentiment, yeah.
Right, sentiment. You're exactly right. Sentiment, emotion. So yeah, the trade-off is going to get more complex. We're going to get back again to the great debate of this show right then. It'll be much more convenient for whatever, because I can just say turn on the lights, or hey Google, hey ChatGPT, whatever. But now what you're giving it in return, the price of AI I think is much higher than people think.
Well, we shall see. But in the meantime, I'm going to be more conscious of how I act towards customer service and the guy at McDonald's, the drive-through, and all of those things, right? It's building a profile. Hey, great conversation as always, Carlos. Good show. Thanks everybody for joining. We're live every Wednesday. We'll be back Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. In the meantime, check out irpaai.com to join our free membership or schedule a complimentary industry briefing session. Carlos, have a great week, my friend.
Same to you, Dan. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.